and they're continuing in this freezing cold. They get to a point where they're in sort of an open area. And we'll go to the book. The Chinese maneuvered down from the ridge lines all around us. They ran across the snow in squad columns, then formed firing lines among the boulders or prone in the snow. Chinese mortars began to fall on us in the CP, which was 50 yards, or us and the CP, which was 50 yards behind us. A round exploded close by and lifted me off the ground. I was dazed for a while, and when full awareness returned, Kelly had me by the arm, leading me toward the CP. "Where are we going, Kelly?" I didn't understand why we were heading away from the line. "Get a corpsman to look at you. I thought you were a goner back there." He pointed to my parka flapping around my knees. It had shrapnel holes in it. "They don't get closer than that to tearing your balls off. It's a good thing you got me around, Lieutenant." The corpsman at the CP was far too busy with the seriously wounded to tend to my mild concussion. The casualties lay in blanket-covered rows. Doktorsky, Davis, and Topple, those are the corpsmen, went from one to the other. They jabbed morphine, slowed bleeding, cleaned out holes, blasted in flesh, patched them, and wrapped them as best they could. The corpsmen had their mouths filled with syrettes of morphine, and their bare hands were bloody. When they worked with enemy mortars exploding, bullets stabbing the air 2 feet above them. Weak, frightened voices called for their help. Doc Mickens from 1st Platoon took some shrapnel, then a slug in the leg where he was patching the wounded in action on Woody Taylor's line. The stretcher bearers dragged Mickens to the CP and laid him in the line of casualties. Next to him, damning the Chinese in his Arkansas drawl, was Sergeant King, who had been blasted by grenades and hit by a burp gun. Paul Rendon, a machine gunner with the platoon, lay there too, a leg shot up. The first platoon was being rapidly depleted and was having a hell of a fight holding their end of the perimeter. So these guys were in a perimeter, like I said, in sort of an open area, and the Chinese just come down and they're in a full-on attack on them. Full-on. Back to the book. The afternoon light faded and we worried about whether the ammo would run out. The Chinese had fully encircled us. Their volume of fire was just enough to keep us pinned down. They would wait for dark, then swarm over our lines. They had plenty of people to do the job. Our bayonets were fixed and our grenades ready. Every man had a target sector, and we kept fire discipline to conserve ammo. We began to settle in and wait for dark. As bullets zinged, grenades exploded, and Marines cried for help, someone yelled out that Captain Wilcox had been hit. He had taken a bullet to the face, and a piece of shrapnel had shattered his arm. Joe Kursaba took over as our skipper. As soon as we heard about the captain, we ran to the CP. We found him there, his head wrapped in a big white ball of a bandage, unable to speak. His blood-soaked sleeve dangled beside him. He kept struggling to get on his feet when the docs put him down on his spread-out poncho. After a while, the morphine kicked in, and the skipper nodded off, groaning softly. Before they stabilized the line around us, the Chinese pushed the first platoon back almost to the CP. So you got the platoons. The CP is the kind of like the brains of the unit, right? They got the different platoons are out in the perimeter in 360 degrees, and then in the center of that, you got the command post, the CP. And you have the radio men in there. You have the people that are going to do fire support. Maybe the mortar section's in there. And then you have the leadership is in that CP. But now we start to see that the platoons are getting pushed back towards the CP. They're losing their perimeter. Just as Joe Kursaba came in to take over command of the company, Woody Taylor stormed in, demanding that we get the hell out of here. "The Gooks have all the high ground. They got us surrounded," he boomed. "They're going to pick us to pieces tonight." Joe Kursaba answered him quietly. "We need air support to run interference for us. Then we might be able to make a break for the road." "They better get to work mighty fast," said Woody. "We only have a few minutes of daylight left." So there's Joe Kursaba's keeping it cool. Again, World War II vet, now just out here getting after it. And that's what they need. So what they need is they need the Corsairs to come in, which if you don't know what a Corsair is an awesome aircraft, World War II vintage. And you can tell them because they have very distinctive wings that have a distinctive bend in them. And they're very, very distinctive looking aircraft, and obviously very good at close air support. Back to the book. All afternoon, Joe Hedrick, the air controller, had attempted to get a piece of the air support dedicated to the 5th Marines. So there was aircraft working for another group of Marines. Now, in the remaining minutes of daylight, he caught a flight of 4 Corsairs in search of action. And he calls those things in, gets them on the horn, calls them in, and here we go. The 4 Corsairs streaked in low above us, pointing themselves at the Chinese positions less than 100 yards away. They dropped their big, earth-shaking bombs, and they scathed the long, deep valley with rockets and heavy-caliber slugs. The Chinese took cover, and we moved out. So that's cover and move once again. All they needed to do to get out of the situation was they needed someone to cover for their movement. That's what they needed, and they couldn't supply it themselves because they're shooting uphill. Didn't have the firepower. In come the Corsairs to get after it and give them cover to move. Back to the book. I lost Grauman that day, the lad who had tried hard to be a good combat Marine. He was running toward me carrying a helmet filled with grenades taken from the wounded when a bullet tore through his throat. The shot didn't knock him down at first, just threw his head back, and I saw a fountain of blood spurt from his neck. He staggered a few steps, then fell face forward in the snow, which quickly turned red. When I got to him, he was already dead. It took hours more for a Baker 17 to make its way the mile down the road. Colonel Davis brought elements of Charlie Company out to meet us. We loaded our dead and wounded on waiting trucks and sent them back to Udom-Ni. The Chinese had cut off the MSR, that's a main supply route, between Udom-Ni and Hagaruri, the colonel informed us. So now they are truly trapped. On the march back into the Udom-Ni perimeter, past midnight, the men were silent, spent from this cold, brutal day. And Captain Wilcox had been a good skipper. And when they get there, Lee was waiting for us when we staggered into Udom-Ni perimeter. Many of the men limped with the first stages of frostbite, and there were some walking wounded who had elected to stay with the company. Undisguised tears ran down Lee's face when he saw the column make its way in. And that was the reason that Lee wasn't with them, was because he literally got ordered that he couldn't go because his arm was becoming infected, and he could not. They would not let him go, and so he's there, and undisguised tears ran down his face as he saw the column make its way in. Joe Kersauber firmed us up at first light while the Corsairs were blazing at enemy hills. He told us that we were going to the aid of Charlie Company, which had been posted on Turkey Hill to guard the MSR. Last night, after we marched away from that area, the Chinese had poured out of the hills and surrounded Charlie. Charlie was fighting for its life when we went to pull them out. So there's a small company of Marines, Charlie Company, and they are surrounded.